We have a great panel. Does global feminism exist? What is its future? So basically, when we ask ourselves the question, what is feminism? We can pause and not necessarily know how to answer the question, because the question is necessarily plural. There are feminism plural. Then it becomes all the more interesting when you ask the question from a cross-cultural perspective. Because feminism may be defined a certain way in the United States, but very differently in India, in Africa, or in Latin America or Mexico, for example. So hence our panel is, I think, a very important one. And we are very fortunate to have three great panelists tonight who will explore the extent to which universal women and human rights can be applicable to non-Western cultures. What are the Western cultures? Western cultures encompass Western Europe and the United States and Canada. But what about the rest of the world? So our panelists will investigate how advocating for women's human rights internationally and valuing cultural diversity are not mutually exclusive. One can respect cultural diversity. One needs to respect cultural diversity because feminism in different cultures can take different forms. So they will discuss with speakers how women are architects of change in their own cultures and societies. What does it mean to be a feminist in these different parts of the world? The first speaker, and we have outstanding speakers. The first speaker is Gugu Selela. She's a third-year policy studies student from South Africa. She serves as a graduate teacher of record for interdisciplinary studies and political science, where she specializes in teaching courses on gender and sexuality. There's something I forgot to mention that we continue with introducing Gugu. I forgot who I am. This is Professor Tuya from the College of Arts and Humanities. And I would like to thank the director of the Woodland Institute for Ethics at Clemson University for sponsoring these events. William McCoy, who is director. We can give him a big round of applause. And Emily Elizabeth Castello, who is assistant director. Give them a big round of applause. Now let me continue with Gugu's presentation. Gugu's research interests include intersectional feminism, Black and Afro-feminism, women's leadership, gender mainstreaming, social justice, and political participation. Gugu's PhD work focuses on transformative leadership, Black and Afro-feminist approaches in the redefinition of policy structure. Please give a big round of applause to Gugu Selela.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Eric, for this introduction. As you saw in the flyer, does global feminism exist? I forgot to time myself. Let me time myself because we told to time myself. Does global feminism exist? And I was asking myself, that is interesting because I'm South African. I'm from the African continent. And I am from the region, which is the global south. So what does it mean? And I am a Black radical feminist. And I was like, what does it mean when we say global feminism exists? So if we have to look at the history of feminism, it is mostly centered, it's mostly centered around the Western, or as we call it, the global South, the global North. And the cultures of global North, the politics, the social perspectives are very different in comparison to the global South. So what is its future? Again, I was like, is it really ideal to even call it global feminism? Before global feminism, we had transnational feminism. And transnational feminism was different in such a way that it focused on nations' unique problems, but still be in solidarity with everyone around the world. However, with global feminism, I'll be like critiquing it a bit. We do acknowledge that the global North women played a key role when it came to women's emancipation. But at the same time, when they were fighting for the right to vote or for the right of citizenship, we also need to remember that the global South women were under colonialism. And colonialism, they were also fighting. But again, when it comes to the global South history or the politics, it is never recorded. But we know that in the global North, it is. So I know there's this phrase, I think it's Annie Lennox, who is like the flagship for global feminism, a white woman. So she says, leaving no one behind. But how realistic is that? Let's speak about it in 2024. I'm from Africa. There is conflict in the DRC and Sudan. And no one is speaking about the women in the DRC or Sudan. So if we are saying we are leaving no one behind, how is it that the global South women from Latin America to Africa to part of Asia and the Caribbean, when it comes to the media or even geopolitics, how is it that those women are excluded in the global discussion? So most feminists in the global South often critique the global North feminists because, again, there's a different power dynamics where the global South feminists feel that the global North feminists overpower them. Sort of like they are the ones that, I guess, control the narrative of what it means to be a feminine. And then if we are not equal, then we should not call it a feminism. So perhaps one way to address or sort of for us to reach, maybe it will take years for us to even reach global feminism, is to also acknowledge our differences. So that's why I'm big on intersectional feminism. We should acknowledge that global North women have privileges because of economic progression and again with their history, which is also unique to the global South women. And the importance of also recognizing the different types of oppression. And most of the time, the global South women face triple oppression, them being either indigenous women, Black women, people of color, or sometimes brown women. I often tell my students, I don't like using the term people of color because it gives a blanket approach. Because within even those people of color, whether it's Asian, whether it's Hispanic, whether it's the Latinas, they have unique lived experiences, those women. So I often just break it down, all of them, Hispanic, everything, to just recognize that. So the importance of having these women in the global South being visible, because even till today, they often feel that they are voiceless in I guess, in the universal platforms, which is like the United Nations and other international organizations. Um, I had a question like, who is global? Who is global feminism serving? Who is it serving? Is it serving everyone or it's serving the global North countries? Um, Again, if we look at the hegemonic power when it comes to global feminism, it places the global North feminist on top. But then again, I will critique the global South as a Global South feminist, within the Global South view, we also have elitism. We also have ethnic divisions. We also have racial divisions that also play a role within us. So again, we are also divided in the Global South, where women from the grassroots, hence why I prefer transnational feminism, because transnational feminism recognizes women from the grassroots, women who are often ignored, women who won't be even here actually talking with you all. Those women play a role and often they are ignored. And again, some may say, even in the global north, there are women who are actually ignored. Definitely there are. The indigenous women here in the USA, we don't hear much about them. Okay. Women, queer women, yes, they are visible, but are they visible enough then, like compared to the cisgender women? So these are some of the questions perhaps I always pose to my students and to myself, whether we, when we speak of feminism, even if you are a feminist, it is absolutely important to recognize your privilege. The fact that you're even calling yourself a feminist means that you have reached a certain societal stage. So again, I'm from South Africa, and most people in South Africa or Southern Africa, even in Africa, they don't even use the term feminism because we don't even have a linguistic term which means feminism. And most of the time, it's through action. Again, if we have to go to East Africa, we had the Mau Mau uprising where women were in the forefront. They were warriors. If you go to Ghana, Yawa Ashantwe, who was one of the warriors. And all of these women played a role in fighting colonialism, but again, their history is never captured. So here's the thing that I often, maybe people ask, why do you use the term radical feminist? Especially in the global south, the term radical feminism is often used because what we are saying, we want to dismantle systems that are oppressing women. So these could be structural racist systems, this could be patriarchy. And then, of course, in the global north, we have the liberal feminism. Liberal feminism speaks about reformation. It speaks about, okay, we can exist in the same structures, which could also be oppressive, especially to the marginalized group or marginalized women, but we can reform and change policies. Radical feminism says, no, we have to dismantle those systems to start all over again. And in the global south, the term radical feminism fits very well because we still have post-colonial settings in Latin America and Africa, and we still have structures of colonialism that still exist. And it's not to say that in the global south, they weren't a patriarchal system, they were, but the term, again, it comes from the global north. Um, let's see. If we look at Bell Hooks speaks in her book of everybody, feminism is for everybody. She acknowledges that liberal feminism assisted in ensuring that women's voices are heard. But then she further critiques that and says it sort of excluded the queer community and also included the Black, Indigenous, brown women. Western feminism is often criticized for flittering the understanding of what is patriarchy and also creating again its own definition of what is a feminist. And it's tend to ignore the lived experiences of the global South women. And that is where the challenge is. And that is where perhaps many global South women tend to not agree with the term global feminism. Let me see. Uh, I think I will stop now and I will come back because I think I've said a mouthful.
Thank you so much, Gugu, for your presentation. Keep in mind, we'll have time at the end for question and answer. Also, I'm asking people to tell everybody it's okay to take notes on your laptop, etc. Second speaker, we have this evening is Archana Venkatesh, Professor of History at Clemson University. Her research interests lie at the intersection of South Asian history, women's history, and history of medicine. She's currently working on her manuscript titled Women, Medicine, and Nation Building, the Lady Doctor, quote, Lady Doctor, and Development in 20th Century South India, which examines the role of women doctors in the creation and expansion of development initiatives in South India from 1919 to 1917. Her work has been published in the Journal of Women History and in Oral History. Her teaching interests are in women's history, history of South Asia, world history, and digital history. Please welcome Professor Venkatesh.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Eric, and thank you all for being here today. It's lovely to see you. I will also start my timer. All right. So I am a historian, as you just learned, which means that I will be telling quite a specific story about feminism and this very difficult word we're dealing with today, global. Not that feminism is an easy word. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about historical narrative as well as my own experiences. I am Indian. I am from South India. I am from a dominant caste. I am a cis woman. And I have been a historian for about 10 years now. So that's a lot of time to channel a lot of material, research. I work in archives in Britain, in the US, and in India. When I first moved here to the US, I encountered a lot of stereotypes, perhaps misconceptions about what being an Indian woman was like. And I didn't know about these stereotypes because I had never moved to the US before to live. So I didn't know, for example, that arranged marriage is something that people think is very shocking and coercive. I didn't know that all of these other things associated with Indian womanhood and Indian culture was seen as something looked down upon. So I started thinking about this and I started reading a lot about this. And of course, my experience is not an isolated one. Most Indian women who move here have the same stereotypes to contend with. This is something that sociologists call death by culture, because as it turns out, even though more women than men are the targets of gun in this country, it's not considered a cultural problem. However, arranged marriage is considered a cultural problem, right? So while American women might die of bullets, Indian women can die of culture, right? It's a different thing to think about. So when I start teaching about this, I do teach a class called Global Feminisms, by the way. So when I start teaching, I always open with this quote by historian Laila Abu-Lughod. She says, and I'm quoting here, "We should want justice and rights for women, but can we accept that there might be different ideas about justice and that different women might want or even choose different futures from the ones that we envision as best?" And that is the question that guides my teaching on global feminism, whether it's in a class called Global Feminisms or in modules about feminism in other countries. So this is where I start my historian dive, so I'm signaling that. My students often come in with the idea that global feminism is a pre-existing fact and has existed almost unhinged from its colonial roots for the past century or so. They see it reflected in the faces that you might have heard, read in school, whether it's high school or college. People like Malala Yousafzai, whose book I think is part of the curriculum in many South Carolina public schools, but I could be wrong. And Chimamanda Adichie, a few others. Typically, these narratives do one of two things. Either they highlight the so-called barbarity of a certain region of the world that is considered quote unquote backward, or they suggest that the region is actually cosmopolitan, which is contrary to popular thought. If they're doing the first thing, the narrative always comes with suggestions about how to help our less fortunate sisters in the global south or the third world, which is considered a constitutive element of global feminism, as many of you might not remember, but then First Lady Laura Bush alluded to in her speech over 20 years ago when we went to war in Afghanistan. What I really want to say here today is that there's no such thing as pure global feminism, nothing that is free from being co-opted by Eurocentrism. Instead, I want to say or introduce the idea that Eurocentrism is a constitutive element of global feminism, as we know from historians like Antoinette Burton, Kumari Jayawardene, Laila Rapp. We see this process of colonialism and the constitutive elements of what these historians called the white woman's burden, right? They differentiated from what Rudyard Kipling calls the white man's burden. Discursively, this was a way in which white women could participate in the colonial civilizing mission, quotes there, making a place for themselves in imperial expansion in Asia and Africa. Materially or on the ground, this meant the rise of two different spheres in which Western women could intervene in the colonized world. The first one is called the phenomenon of the Mem Sahib, or the lady sir almost. These women usually married European men and traveled to places like India to live there. Their household staff consisted of quote unquote native women and men, and they saw their role as educational. They are teaching these women how to care for their own children, how to be hygienic, how to cook, how to clean. This sphere of influence was critiqued even in its own time, because these Mem Sahibs or lady Sahibs who wanted to participate in the civilizing mission, but in a way that wasn't the military colonial expansion method, they were dismissed by societies in London, especially, or even in France, for being lazy or unwilling because they didn't want to clean their own homes or raise their own children, but outsource this, right? Now, the second sphere, and the more interesting one, I think, is that of the female missionary. These women, whether married or single, literally carried out a civilizing mission, and I'm using that word deliberately. In practical terms, this meant that they differentiated themselves from the Mem Sahibs by pointing to the wide-ranging nature of their work. They started schools. If they were medical women, they started clinics and hospitals. They contrasted this broad institution building with this seemingly narrower vision of the domestic sphere in which the Mem Sahibs could carry out the same task. It also meant that these women missionaries prided themselves on their austerity, their willingness to live in rural parts of India and engage with Indian womanhood on a larger scale. Now, I want to talk about this group because women missionaries did not just contrast themselves with the Mem Sahibs, they also declared authoritatively that they knew more about Indian womanhood than Indian women leaders themselves. This is through the 19th and 20th centuries. At first glance, this seems like a wildly colonial approach, which of course it is. However, when we localize the prehistory of this global feminism, it becomes clear that this claim is more interesting than something we can easily dismiss as being just colonial imaginings. Because in India, caste defines everything. It defines who you speak to, who you live with, what you can eat, who you marry, who you can eat with, the kind of food you eat, how you pray, where you are permitted to learn, where you are permitted to walk, the spaces you are permitted to inhabit. So, coming back to 20th century India, these Western missionary women were actually willing to engage with women from oppressed caste groups, which is something that dominant caste Indian women were not willing to do then, and for the most part are not willing to do now, right? This matters because it is the dominant caste women in India who make up the bulk of the feminist organizing through the 20th and even the 21st century. They led women they led movements, I beg your pardon, for women's education, women's suffrage, equal pay, access to healthcare, domestic protections against dowry and child marriage. And of course, all of this is under the larger umbrella of nationalist organizing or organizing for the development of India into modernity, whatever this modernity might look like. So when we look at the leadership of the Indian feminist movement, it's clear that they're all dominant castes or highly educated. It also becomes clear when we examine the terms of engagement that these women set for Indian feminism with the restrictions of the British colonial era and after. Breaking caste taboos was not high on the Indian feminist agenda at all. All of their movements, when they even engaged with oppressed caste women, was aimed at lifting their less fortunate sisters out of so-called ignorance, air quotes there. Barring a few exceptions, these dominant caste women were reluctant to situate the suffering of their so-called less fortunate sisters within the umbrella of caste oppression, which is, of course, the basis for Indian patriarchy. Dominant caste women were, by and large, unwilling to challenge the caste system as it went against their own interest and still goes against their own interests. Historians have called this maternalist feminism, and it looks very much like the civilizing mission envisaged by those missionary women that I was talking about a minute ago. Those feminist leaders who did object to this decasting of the patriarchal oppression in India had to find incredibly creative ways, right, to negotiate caste oppression. The first oppressed caste woman to do this was a woman called Savitribai Phule, and I'm happy to talk more about her. She started for girls. She was the first to start a school for girls in India. This was in the mid-19th century. She was pilloried in the press and the papers for providing education to oppressed caste children who were historically barred from accessing educational spaces. She was attacked physically on her way to and from the school itself. People would throw mud at her. She was shunned by Indian women's leadership for the most part and persisted in the face of overwhelming odds and attacks. Now, by the early 20th century, oppressed caste women started to organize on the basis of caste oppression rather than anti-patriarchal oppression or nationalist oppression even, because they were repeatedly excluded from mainstream feminist spaces. They found also that dominant caste women continued to ignore their demands to recognize the role of caste as an oppressing factor, right? So these oppressed caste women were saying, yes, child marriage is a problem, but so is the fact that I, an oppressed caste woman, am prevented from literally entering your home because of caste-based notions of purity and pollution. And you, the dominant caste leadership, are refusing to acknowledge that this is the basis of my oppression, right? So from the 50s and 60s, oppressed caste women feminists began to find common cause beyond the borders of the nation state. And this ties into what Gugu said about transnationalism, because they were able to make common cause specifically with Black feminism in the United States, while remaining staunchly local in terms of the actual issues which they wanted to engage with. This is a manifestation of global feminism, which I find is the way forward if the idea of global feminism is to have a future. When we set the terms of engagement for global feminism, these terms must necessarily be local, right? So it is impossible to have any kind of reasonable feminist engagement in India without acknowledging caste oppression as the root cause of suffering for the majority of Indian women. The leadership of mainstream Indian feminism refuses to acknowledge this. Black feminism in the US does acknowledge this. So of course it makes sense that oppressed caste feminists in India make common cause with Black feminist theory and practice in the United States. So we often approach, especially teaching with this laudable goal of kind of busting the myth of global or universal sisterhood. And I suggest we must go further and also rethink the myth of nationalist feminist organizing. We should look to find solidarities which cut across national borders while remaining within the framework of questioning global systems of dominance and power because they often overlap. I want to come back a little bit to the personal because I want to talk about the issue of birth control in particular. Now, in many Western countries, right, access to birth control is seen as the culmination of struggle, seen as a liberatory mechanism, a success story, a triumphant story. In India, it's the opposite. Birth control is used as a tool, has been used as since 95 for various reasons, not so much. But from the 50s onwards, was a tool used to repress women and control their sexuality by two actors, the Indian government and the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, which are, of course, based in the United States. These entities work together in tandem to make Indian women the targets of sterilization programs, right? With overt or implied violence in their campaigns to force family planning. And if you are wondering, at the height of this forced family planning, a woman was the head of state in India, right? So we have to look beyond the symbolic here. And if we dig a little deeper, we will be reminded once again, it wasn't the elite, upper middle class, dominant caste Indian women who were the targets of this family planning program. For the most part, it was and is oppressed caste and working class women. So rather than think about global feminism from a Western point of view, I believe that if it is to have a future, global feminism requires us to localize. It is the only way in which this endeavor might succeed. There is obviously no one-size-fits-all model for feminism beyond the borders of a nation state. And I hope that we will progress towards that there is no such model even within the borders of a national state or a nation state. All right, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. First speaker, I'm not sure I'm going to read the whole thing because it's such a long biography. We are very privileged to have Araceli Hernandez La Roche as a speaker tonight. She's a USC Upstate Professor of Modern Languages and founding director of South Carolina Centro Latina, the state's first university-based center for the study of Hispanic and Latino cultures. Its three pillars are Latinx and interdisciplinary studies and civic leadership, the multilingual public humanities, and translation and community interpreting. She has several publications on world wars, existentialist writers, the public humanities, including Friends in the Time of COVID-19, the public humanities as a vaccine for coexistence, and immigration in the Americas. She served as co-president of the Association of Department of Languages, ALD Executive Committee, MLA Ad hoc Committee valuing the public humanities, and boards such as the ACLU South Carolina. She is excited to serve on the Cambridge University Press Open Access Public Humanities Journal. She was recognized as the 2020 Career Women of the Year by the Business and Professional Women in South Carolina, 2020 Inclusion Advocate of the Year by the local chamber, and 2023 South Carolina Humanities recipient of the Acres Prize for using culture and history to bring people together. Finally, South Carolina Big News is recognizing next month Dr. Hernandez La Roche as one of the 2024 Women of Influence Greenville Award winner. Please welcome Dr. Hernandez La Roche.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Buenas noches. Buenas noches. Buenas noches. Buonasera. Buonasera. Who can say good evening in other languages?
Say vanakkam.
Yeah, di bingelele.
Thank you so much. So every time I get invited to a university, I ask this question. It's a test for you. Is our society monolingual or is our society multilingual? Can you give me your answer? Yes. Oh my God, I love that. So monolingual because we don't mix. Other responses. Anyone else want to share? What do you think? Do we live in a monolingual or in a multilingual society?
Oh, okay. I feel like it depends on where you're from because I'm from Florida and down south around like the Miami area, we have a lot of multilingual people. So I feel like those different languages, we actually come together and know multiple languages.
So Miami is culturally dependent on, like, since its creation, the immigration of people from Cuba and other Hispanic countries. So I think that might be the reason why it's multilingual. But uh, I can't say the same for other areas. They're predominantly white and like it, most of them like to stay that way and really don't pay attention to other cultures.
Thank you for helping me. And I also want to thank my husband, Francois, who said so amazing and always comes with me to, when he can, to different places. Well, why do I ask this question? My big frustration is, as a professor, I'm a professor at the University of South Carolina upstate. Do you know what a full professor is? We have an assistant professor who's trying to get tenure, right? You want to get tenure. It's a very, could be a very political process. Then you're when you're a tenured professor, you're an associate professor, and then, you can stop there, and then you can go on and get your heart broken again, right? Because it's a heartbreaking experience, and you go for it again, and then you try to become a full professor. And a full professor, you don't have to try to go to that rank. But some of us do, we like heartaches maybe, and we reach the full professor status. So now in my career, 2 years ago, I became a full professor at USC Upstate. And I want to share with you that, I love my university, but we believe that I'm the first Hispanic to go through all the ranks to become the first Hispanic professor. And that can seem like, oh, that's so wonderful. That makes me so sad because do you know that Hispanics are the largest minority in the United States at 19%? Yet, guess what percentage of full professors in the country? If we had 100 full professors, representative of different universities in this room, I think we're almost 100 people here. Maybe I'm just optimistic. But let's say we were 100 professors here. How many Latina full professors would be in the room? What is the percentage out of 100? Zero? Almost, almost. Less than one, right? There's always a little bit of a debate. Is it? Yes. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to hire you as a research assistant. Thank you. And come with me to give different talks. So I'm part of the 1%. So my big goal right now in life is to make noise for 10, because I believe that I spend a lot of time in the community. I spend a lot of time with activists. I spend a lot of time with advocates. And guess what their gender is when you're out advocating for human's rights, women's rights, immigrant rights? Guess what the #1 gender we see out there advocating? Is it men or is it women? Women, right? Women. Yet, we're so few represented inside of the institution. I love higher ed. I love being a professor, but sometimes higher ed breaks our hearts. So I'm going to read 2 quotes, unless someone else wants to do it, because I'm not the best reader in front of a crowd. I have this book, The Tenure Track Process for Chicana and Latina Faculty, Experiences of Resisting and Persisting in the Academy. This is by Patricia Perez. There's this one little quote. Would anyone like to read a little quote for me? Anyone? No? Oh, I'm putting, thank you. Thank you so much. And what is your name? Lisa, thank you. Do you mind reading this little passage? Chicana, Latina faculty continue to navigate cultural borderlines in academia as we struggle to carve a rightful space as scholars in our disciplines while maintaining compromiso or commitment to our families, communities, and students in higher education as mothers, daughters, and activists. Compromiso to your community need. We can all have compromiso. Can you say that word in Spanish? Compromiso. A commitment, right? So right now, my compromiso in higher ed is to shake things up. And why? Why do I want to shake things up? Because I feel that what is at stake when faculty bodies are not more representative of the population, that we're missing out on talent, that we're missing out on perspectives, that students are missing out on role models. A long time ago, maybe in another century, this is a little scary, when I was an undergraduate student at UCLA, I used to see, I was a French and Italian studies double major, and I was such a nerd, nerding out on French literature, revolutionary text, social contracts. And then I discovered Francophone literature with this, I'm going to say it, badass professor, Françoise Lyonnais, who was just so wonderful. And then I went to France for a year, to Toulouse. People thought I was Moroccan, Algerian, Tunisian, and that really shaped how I approached the French studies, French language. And then I was so excited. I probably broke my father's Mexican little heart. And I decided I'm no longer going to be a Mexican, an immigration attorney. I'm going to go and do my PhD in French studies so I can study France and North Africa. And I really wanted to study and write a dissertation on North African women and North African immigrants in France. But I was being very naive. As much as I loved to study at UC Berkeley, that, I'm a first-gen immigrant. I have an accent because my father made us speak Spanish at home. Thank you, Papi. Now, so I was really out of place in my PhD program. My professors didn't know what to do with multilingual me. I spoke Spanish, I spoke Italian, I was learning Arabic and Nahua, a lingua franca, indigenous language from Mexico. So to make a long story short, if I was going to get a PhD from that department, I needed to get very canonical. So I looked for a white, male, super famous philosopher, writer, Jean-Paul Sartre. So, you know, I couldn't be an immigrant and have all these other markers and study that. You know, I just needed to prove myself. But thankfully, thanks to studying these existentialist writers, thanks to studying public intellectuals, I didn't know that years later I would be in South Carolina advocating and using those public speaking skills to advocate for the Latino community and also advocate for Latinas and Latinos and Hispanics in higher ed. I have so much to share with you, but I know I don't have a lot of time. I do want to give a big shout out to someone so wonderful that you should know, and you can look him up. His name is Ivan Segura. He is the Director of Multicultural Programs at the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. And maybe 6 years ago, he would go around the state of South Carolina where we live, and he would show up to communities. He's an artist activist, and he is the founder. He tells me he's not the founder, but I'm going to call him the founder of Palmetto Luna Arts. They do Hispanic art. So he would go to rural communities. He would go to Greenville. I'm sure he came here, and he would ask local Latino people, who's the community leader here? Who looks out after others? If there's an immigration raid, who is the community leader advocating for the community? And guess what gender those people were? Women. They were women, right? Thank you. They were women. Many of them sometimes didn't speak English. Sometimes they were in college educated like you. But they had this fire in their belly. They wanted to make South Carolina safe for everyone. So he did something with artists. He commissioned photographers, and they went around and took a photo of these women. Sometimes they were undocumented students. Sometimes they were mothers. Sometimes they were, business women. I was honored at Nerdy. One of these women celebrated. And you know what he called us? Chingonas. Anyone know what a chingona is? Can you say that word for me? Chingona. One more time. Chingona. Badass, right? So basically he had these women, these exhibits would go to different libraries, the Citadel, to different universities, and he would give the opportunity for these women pictured there, college educated, not college educated, to share their story, to share their struggle. So for me, as a professor, as much as I love spending time at Clemson University, at USC Upstate, at other universities where I get invited or where I teach, I must spend time outside because my university, maybe sometimes where I learn the most is out in the community. I'm learning from women who are hustling, or being entrepreneurs, people, Latina women, they may have a hard time getting loans, maybe their accents, their language barriers, make them have closed doors. But when I'm around them, they're so positive. And sometimes I think too much, right, as an academic. So I need to be around those women. I want to encourage you, I'm almost out of time. I want to encourage you to read this book that really lit a lot of fires around the United States. And it's called Community as Rebellion, a syllabus for surviving academia as a woman of color. Lorgia Garcia Peña. Do you know who Lorgia Garcia Peña is? She's a professor who is so amazing, was at Harvard for 8 years, super popular with her students. She taught Latinx studies, and she got denied tenure at Harvard. Students protested, community members protested, and she wrote this book, a love letter to her students. And that's where, you know, that heartache. And she shares her story, and she has a syllabus, right, of people we should read. And her number one thing that she offers us is this: when you feel so alone in higher ed, in academia, what do you have to do? You build community. You know, going through tenure, I was the first Mexican American professor at my institution to get tenure. It was such big news that it was even in the local news. You can read that story. But one of the things I learned is, in order for me not to feel so alone, doubt myself, is I need to step out into the community. And thanks to that gave me the content, the information, the inspiration to write more about the public humanities. And if you're interested in learning more about the public humanities, please follow South Carolina Centro Latino on Instagram, South Carolina Centro Latino. But I want to leave you with one question. For me, global feminisms are still not present in higher ed. How could they be when we are so underrepresented? You know, all last week, I got up at 3 a.m. in the morning. I was so stressed out. I was holding boundaries with some colleagues. I was advocating for myself. I was advocating for others, being seen as difficult by other colleagues, or standing my ground. And a colleague of mine, African American, she called me. She hadn't slept either, and she faced the same barrier. So this morning, I got up, so excited to know that I was going to see you. We planned an event. Our university still doesn't know this, but and you're all invited, March 26th, and it's going to be called, I forgot the title, but 3 full professors share their stories, and we want students to come out, and we're going to start educating our university community, other university communities, what they're missing out on when they hire so few of us. Okay? So for me, global feminisms, until more of our talent is recognized and hired and promoted, and we get more course releases for the work we do, that doesn't exist. So my question to you, my challenge to you is, this week, as you're going to classes and you're seeing your professors, think about, are your professors representative of this state? Okay, and what are we missing out on when they are not? Thank you. Gracias.
Okay, we are here for you. And so we are looking forward to your questions. We have about 15, 20 minutes. So don't be shy. We have someone who will bring the microphone to you. And our 3 speakers will be very much happy to answer the questions you have. We have a question in the back. You have a lot of running to do. That's what I think. Okay.
First of all, we thank you for being here. As an American male in this society, I'd love to know your advice for the intersectionality of global feminism and the American male. And then just one item, because I know that could probably be a book, but just like your top thing that you would want an American male to know about global feminism. And then what would you want a global male to know, since they seem to be 2 different things?
Well, that's a good question. First thing, that all of them, Black American men, white men, the global South men, is that they are privileged. They gain from patriarchal societies. But at the same time, often I draw this pyramid in my class, and my students know Normally I say that first there is a, okay, start from home. Yes, on top, the patriarch. Yes, so it's the white man, there's the white woman, and then Black, Hispanic, Latina, Indigenous women who often are with the children, right? So we, again, if we look at intersectionality, if we look at a Black man and a white man, the commonality is because they are male, right? But the difference is their race. Then if we put a global South man, there's the geographic different, and again, the historical difference. But throughout history, all men globally, they benefited from patriarchy and they still benefit from patriarchy. So what they can do is either to be allies and also to dismantle such structures that are oppressive to women.
That's a great question. I like your pyramid. I'd love to see it. Uh, I think for me, it would probably be, I'm going to focus on the American part of your question because I, as you can tell from my accent, am not from here. I am from India, which is something I tell every single one of my students at the first day of class every semester. What I don't tell them is it's extremely hard to be here. It's very, very like bureaucratically difficult to get to the United States. And it's very hard to travel. Visas are expensive. Once I leave this country, I cannot come back unless I go to my home country and get it stamped in my passport. So let's think, so for me, if you want me to sum it up in one sentence, it would be, think about where women are from and the kinds of paperwork that they might have to be doing in their daily lives that you might not have to. That's the main thing. And I think in terms of men from the global South, it depends on where they're from. For Indian men, I would say probably the same thing. Think about the things that women are doing with their daily lives that you're not doing. It might not be paperwork. It might look different.
For all types of men. Don't fear us. Don't feel threatened. One thing that really annoys me is performative DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And that can be other women, other men. And I see it all the time. Don't, please, no, the notice when it's not authentic and because your lack of sincerity, we have to work more. And for me, it's like the wear and tear. When I was, again, as an undergraduate in Los Angeles, and then in the Bay Area, in Berkeley, where Eric also got his PhD, I would hear about African-American female professors who died too soon. Sometimes when I can't sleep because I say, do I need to fight this battle or not? I start thinking about my heart, uh, our health matters, but also the health of our communities, the health of our nation. If you don't feel threatened by us, we can co-create, we can build stronger communities. So really, we're shooting ourselves on the foot when we fear strong women.
Question. Yes, you have a question, right? Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sherelle. My question actually is, in terms of global feminism, do you think that the global South and the global North will one day be on the same page
It's in terms of advocacy and justice issues, and like what trends do you think need to change in order for it to take place?
Yeah, my French husband, Francois. Sorry, I'm gonna put you on the but as we were driving here, he reminded me that yes, I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico. Mexico has a lot of issues, like any other countries, but Mexico is about to elect its first female president. Um, we don't know which one because both the candidates are women. But what about in France? What about in the United States? In Latin America, we've had female presidents. So, sometimes the global north is behind. Great question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I really appreciate that. And to build on your point, Araceli, I think so, what does a even playing field look like? Because when I first moved here, I was absolutely shocked to learn how difficult it was to access birth control and reproductive care, because that is not the case in India. I can go to any public hospital and request, obviously, politely, because I'm a polite person, request a termination of pregnancy as long as it falls within 10 particular parameters, one of which is failure of contraception. And they are obligated, the doctor there, to give me one. I can't do that in this country, right? So again, it depends on what you want, what you consider an even playing field. Of course, even though India has had a female head of state, she was the most corrupt one, right? So it doesn't always work out the way you think it might.
Oh, that's my student. Thank you. I think I often say this to my student, even when we use the terms development, what does development mean? Are we talking about economics? Are we talking about policies? Are we talking about social or cultural standards? And that's what we have to ask. And like my colleagues have stated, we have had many head of states from the global south. There are many progressive policies. As I'm from South Africa, I often say this, the same-sex marriage, we had it in 1996, I think in the US, 2005 or 2006. Again, what does progression mean? To answer your question, Jarell, like Archon said, it depends, because politically we are very divided, and systematically, again, we are very different. So we have to dismantle structures in order for us to unite and embrace global feminism. Until people from the global north are able to share their power with the global south, perhaps we can. But for now, the global, oh, sorry. You okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, sorry. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, actually, we have a question from Carlos, and it's about what are your thoughts on male feminism? Not sure what to make of the question, but what do you think about men? Can one be? I may reformulate the question and ask: can men be feminists?
Yeah.
Are they? So who would like to say a few words about Carlos' question?
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. What a great question. I think, yes, I mean, of course, I think men can be feminists. In fact, I don't come from this South, but I come from a South. I come from South India. And the leader of the social movement that was launched in the 1920s that continues to inform the political landscape of South India, who is a man affectionately known as Periyar, or Great Leader, is, in my mind, one of the greatest feminists of all time, because in 1926, he said women should have equal rights to divorce, Women should have rights to contraception. Men should have zero rights to contraception. It's not their choice. Women should have custody of their own children, and equal pay should be the norm. And he also said that anything that governs our civil lives as women should be unlinked from religion, which of course in India means caste. So he was quite a radical feminist to the point where he was too radical for mainstream women feminists. So yes, I absolutely believe that male feminists exist and have changed the political and social landscape for the better. I will note that many of his colleagues are women, but you asked about male feminists, so I brought him up.
Thank you. Wait for the microphone.
And have it for okay. So on your statement about men not having the right to contraception that the guy made, like, one, do you believe in that statement? Okay. So what are your thoughts on male birth control? Honestly. No, honestly, like I haven't heard much about it because there isn't any viable option yet, but I was just wondering what y'all's thoughts were on that.
It would be nice to hear a question from women because so far there are 4 men asking questions. Okay.
Hello, my name's Avery. I would just like to say I'm inspired by all of your work, and I'm very thankful for powerful women. Just don't want to make it loud. I think you're all inspiring, and I am very thankful for powerful women on our campus. You all talked about the localization of feminism. You talked about like community, and all of you highlighted that. As a white woman in a predominantly white campus, how do you think that we can best create change a realistic way and create better change in our community here on campus and around local areas?
To say that my other student. We are going to go back to the privilege. The first thing, I think the Black feminist thought speaks about the consciousness of raising, being aware of who you are and which environment you are. So as a white woman student in Clemson, you need to point out your privileges. You need to educate yourself. Yes, people of color, brown people, Black people can assist you, but it's also your job to educate yourself, especially pertaining to issues of intersectionality.
That's a real great broad answer. I have some specific ones, but first I'm going to talk about your thing about male birth control. All right, let me turn that. Oh, I don't think it's oppressive, but let me ask you a question. How many ways are there for women to prevent getting STIs? Yeah. How many ways are there for women to prevent getting pregnant? Loads. They keep coming up with them. So, yeah. So what if I asked you the same question for men? How many ways are there for men to prevent getting STIs? Yeah. And how many ways are there for men to prevent pregnancy? So who gets the burden of what and whose body is dispensable? Yeah. I really like that question because this is what I study as well. I mean, it's what my research is on. It's about family planning and healthcare. I really love your question about white women on campus. And I'm not going to give you a broad answer because I think that Gogo's done an amazing job of doing that. But I'm going to give you 3 strategies. Can I do that? Okay, the first thing, have you guys heard of a website called ratemyprofessor.com? Yeah. Okay, do you know how hurtful comments on that website are? Yeah, so maybe one thing to do is be kind to your professors or stop using it, right? The second thing, so rate my professor, I don't even look at it anymore because it's too painful at this point. The other thing I have to look at, because as you said, I'm going up for tenure, is something called student evaluation of instruction. Yes, which is something that you all fill out at the end of every semester. Those comments go in my permanent record. And there's a ton of research, I'm happy to share articles about how women, and especially women of color, get really terrible student evaluations for literally the same job, right? So maybe be kinder in your student evaluations of your women of color instructors. And in fact, every instructor, I would say, to be kind. And also tell your friends about the above two things.
Thank you so much. I love your questions. Retweet us, repost us. You know, this is also for students, but also for white female colleagues at my institution and other places. Show up to our events because we're trying to diversify your networks. You know, the people who show up to South Carolina Centro Latino and Centro events are other students, other community members, but sometimes it breaks a little bit my heart not to see other faculty, not to see other administrators. And then we talk about, oh, we want to be more inclusive. Oh, we want to do this more so. And a lot of times we're doing that we're just adding more work to ourselves because we're educators. And if we cannot have all students in our classrooms, that's why we organize these beautiful events that Dr. McCoy and Dr. Julia and others have done. So show up for people and invite others to do as well.
We have a question over there. Go ahead. Question. And then we have a question from Manny online. Right here.
I think this kind of builds off of her question, but maybe on a wider scale. I'm Nigerian myself, and I really related to the comment that Dr. Vikadesh made when you discussed there being like colonial structures that still exist, and the way in which people who exist outside of that nation state to get involved in conversations of feminism has become a little tricky because, you know, you don't want to impede upon structures that are already happening or introduce something that's not sustainable in that place. So, like, I very much understand the fact that these movements have to start from within, but what can people who do not maybe are not from the South or the global South do to still be involved in a sustainable way in global feminism?
Thank you for that. That's a great question. So before I started my PhD, I worked in water resource development in rural India. And I was not from there, right? So this is kind of a microcosm of the larger question you're asking. And I went in because my supervisor, my boss, told me exactly what she wanted from me, which was leverage your privilege, right? I was the only person who wasn't from there. I was the only person whose caste privilege would make sure that government officers would take me seriously. So I went in there to help set up the systems in play. I introduced all of the people who live there, the local actors, to everyone who was in a government office. And I just kept showing up, showing my face, showing my privilege for 2 years. And when I left, it continued. This is over 10 years ago. But those connections that just by virtue of my positionality, I was able to do that. I'm sorry, this is such a lame answer for you, but it's, you know, it's a practical truth. Just show up, show your face, create a continuity. And that's what I found particularly useful.
Thank you. I love your question, but each and every one of you has so much power. You really do. And as students, coming together on an issue, universities listen to you. The trustees of a university listen to you. So please show up. Go to city council meetings when you go back home, or even here when you're a student here. Be civically engaged. And when others cannot be there, you can be there and report back to other students. But I think we have this myth that, some issues seem so overwhelming, but really it just takes showing up, and showing up for others. And then something so simple and maybe so fun at times too is, who do you have lunch with? Who do you have dinner with? Who do you spend time with? You're at a moment in your lives when you get to meet people from all over the world, other parts of the state, other states. Use this time here, this time in your life to get to diversify as much as you can your network.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kiana Bell. My question is, I know we're Gen Z and there's a lot of opinions on us, but for as far as the feminist wave, for our generation, do you think that we are doing something like, are we making a big, I know like, we have social media, but is there something that we can be doing more to make an even bigger impact? Or is there still, glass ceilings that's still going to affect how that plays a role in what we do?
So interesting because I think I spoke about the generational gaps in my women's global perspective class. I think with the Gen Z, you have the social media, and we have seen how the Gen Z have used that platform to advocate. And I think compared to other generations, I must say, when it comes to social issues, the Gen Z are very much way advanced than, I'm sorry, millennial baby boomers, but they are very much very progressive. So I think keep up the good work. I cannot critique the Gen Z when it comes to advocacy because you have used your platform very well, except the bullying, which often happens there. But besides that, compared to the other generations, the Gen Z are very much vocal and they know how to express themselves.
I love your question. Even though I'm older, I love social media. Social media is my little weapon. I've been taking photos. I want to take a photo here, like that, from here. But I have to say that as a professor, one of the funnest things I do in a week, I have this marketing team. So I'm in languages. I have two students who volunteered. They're in the School of Business. It's not even on campus. It's in downtown Spartanburg. A finance student, Alexander Segarra, and Dana Lopez in marketing. And then I have another student in graphic design. They saw me speak at different events. They said, you know what? We want to help you build South Carolina Centro Latino. We're on Instagram. We want to help you build. We want to use our talent to help you do things better. And thanks to them, last week we celebrated our first 1,000 followers. Maybe after today, we'll have a little bit more. So please share your talents with us. I believe in multi-generational teams. A shout out to Cassie Tanks, a world history digital studies doctoral student who's teaching my USC Upstate students how to create this Black Paris website. And now as an undergrad student like Jasmine Elizalde, she even teaches us how to code and do other types of things. So we need your talent so that we understand the world that you're making today. So, adelante.
We have time for one more question. I have the question here, then we go. I am an undergraduate going into the education field. As a white woman, how can I best educate myself and be aware of biases I might have going into the field? Currently reading Bell books. What other literature could be helpful?
Yeah, we all love I can just add other literature that the students can read on. You could read some Toni Morrison, some Audre Lorde, some Barbara Smith, especially the feminist thought book will sort of enlighten you when it comes to Black women, brown women, and Hispanic. That will give you an enlightenment. And then I don't know what else.
I'll add one book to your list. Seeing Like a Feminist, Nivedita Menon. It's about women in the global south.
And here the book that I have, Community as Rebellion, a syllabus for surviving academia as women of color, because she's an educator, you're an educator, you're preparing to be one, and that's going to give you a lot of insight. The more we understand how schools work, how universities work, the more powerful we are.
We have one more question. Thank you so much for your patience. One more question before 7 p.m. Here, this lady here. Okay, over there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was doing it perfectly fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your patience. One more question, and thank you so much for being here.
Okay, so as it pertains to global feminism, do you think that feminism should be localized, or do you think it would be more helpful if it was more of like a united front across the globally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we can have global feminism without localizing it, you know? So I think that both the things you said are correct.
Please give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Feel free to come and ask some questions. One more thing. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I will say another great place to find us is on our socials as well, and it's at Clemson Ethics. So it couldn't be simpler than that. Matt here is our digital transition specialist, so writing it right up there. We can't wait to see you all. I'm great to have you here tonight. Again, thank you, Dr. for hosting.
Thank you, everybody.